Good morning or bon dia and welcome everybody. And it's nice to be a member of the Ireland Portugal Business Network and to meet you. And Arnold, thanks a lot for the opportunity today. So I like the way you, hold on a second, I'm just sharing. I really like the way you call this a masterclass. I prefer a webinar, but we'll see at the end of it whether you feel everyone's gotten some value from it. So I'll get into it. I'm going to bring you through a little bit of an origin story. So there'll be some storytelling. There'll be a case study. And during that case study, there'll be a few tips and tricks in terms of scaling well. I presume everyone can hear me. Just give me a thumbs up quickly. So I just want to make sure that we're doing all the right things. Yeah, and then we'll get into some questions. So hopefully I'll have you out of here within about 45 minutes after a couple of questions. If I ramble, then we may make the full hour, but hopefully we'll stick to the point. So let's get into it. So this is Matthew, and he's the first of two people I'm going to actually introduce you to today. Now, Matthew is a serial entrepreneur and internet pioneer in South Africa and has built and sold businesses, done very well, and was also a good customer of mine. So I was working as an executive at a fast-growing internet service provider doing cloud computing, and he was one of our users of those cloud computing. We became friends. Matthew gave me some advice on the side of a very steep mountain pass one morning. And that advice that he gave me was probably a catalyst to how I made changes in my life and what ultimately became Saltwater Consulting. So Matthew was an avid mountain biker, and I probably started about a year after him. And I wasn't as fit as he was, but after about a year or so, I got into it. And I decided I was ready to join him. He was a neighbor as well and lived around the corner. And I decided to say yes to a morning bicycle ride up one of the steepest mountain passes in the Cape Peninsula. And as you can see, we experienced reasonable weather like you do in Portugal. So it was 6 a.m. on a Saturday morning, and it was already in its mid-20s. And we arrived at the trailhead with a crew, probably about 10 people. And I was very nervous because, again, I didn't feel I had the fitness to keep up with the crew. So I went up ahead of the group, and very quickly, I was just to try and get a head start. Very quickly, I had run out of energy, run out of breath. I had changed through my gears, and my legs were spinning ferociously. And Matthew came up to me and put his hand on my back and said, "Al, you need to get out of the granny gear." So the granny gear, for those of you that don't know, and it's a mountain biking term, is the very big gear that sits at the back of the bike, and it's the one you move in to make light work of big climbs. And I spent a lot of time in that granny gear, but as a result, I wasn't moving very fast or very far. And Matthew said, "Al, you can come back to that granny gear. It's always there as a fallback, but you need to start being comfortable getting uncomfortable." And I got out of the granny gear. I really struggled a bit, but eventually started making some progress and caught up with the rest of the crew. So I didn't pay too much attention to that day, but fast forward, I moved to Ireland. I joined this guy's company. And I think that's where I really learned a lot about, I'd been involved in scaling businesses for many years and bringing in strong operational rigor. But a company that now has 1.3 million people and growing. I came in at a time at the beginning of 2018 in Ireland where we were building an international language support team, and I was running their critical escalation management in their web services business. So it was really like getting your special ops training at Amazon, and it was a fascinating experience just learning how they teams operate, how they can operate autonomously, how they can get things done and meet goals. And this is across their devices business, their music business, their Prime, their Prime, and all the other businesses. So, and most importantly, their web services business, which is a big part of Amazon today. So anyway, I learned a lot there, and I just want to get back to Matthew for a second. So unfortunately, Matthew, at the age of 45, lost a short battle to cancer. I was in South Africa at the time on holiday and got the message. And we were able to celebrate his life by going up that big pass. It was the last time I did that pass, but he actually did it about 110 times, believe it or not. But we celebrated his life that morning. And again, good weather, got up early, and a group of us went to pay tribute to Matthew. And I thought about the advice he gave me about getting out of the granny gear and getting uncomfortable. And that sort of sparked, just a number of changes that were about to happen in my life. Now, Matthew was writing a book at the time about his life, and it was called So You Want to Build a Startup. And it was the quintessential operational playbook to growing businesses. And he had grown and sold a few, particularly in the internet space. He didn't get to finish the book, but his wife, Bridget, did. And it was published late 2019. And early 2020, I picked it up. And I read that book and realized immediately after reading that book that I needed to get out of big tech, get uncomfortable, get out of my granny gear, and start a business. And start a business where I could help people or teach people how to fish. So teach them to become operationally efficient. So I just want to bring you into a couple of challenges that I've seen in businesses, and you've probably seen. I'm sure there's consultants on this call, there's business owners, there's people that have worked in big corporates. But I'll just go through these very quickly. Founders that share roles and responsibilities. This happens. Companies start, two directors normally start a business. They share their responsibilities. They both look after sales. They both look after operations. They both look after finance. It seems clear to them. It's not very clear to the people they hire in terms of who they report to and who actually makes the decision and who should be making the decision. So that's a challenge. Individual contributors being promoted into management roles without training. That's actually quite important in the tech space, because a lot of tech companies are founded with developers or coders or very highly technical people that need to come in and build a product quickly and get that product to market. But then suddenly they start scaling and they have to hire a lot of people, and they then have to focus their energy on management. So these individual contributors get pushed into management roles that they really feel uncomfortable in, and they'd ideally like to get back into more tech leadership type roles rather than people management. The other challenge that I've seen is hiring is not owned by the teams. It's an HR problem. You see this in a lot of small companies where they say, yeah, we'll just get HR to get the people in or whatever. And it's not. The human resources are there to be a seat at the table and to provide strategic advice on your people, culture, and other things. But they're not the hiring manager. And I think it's important for managers of teams, technology teams, sales teams, and others, that they become the owners of the recruitment in that organization and bringing people in. And not only them as the manager, but their people. Recruitment should be something that everybody gets involved with. And it's the team that need to also make sure that they're hiring for fit. Priority centered around who shouts the loudest. You may have heard the term hippo, or the highest paid person in the room. And the hippos tend to sort of focus on what's priority, what's demanding attention right now. And as a result, a lot of priorities get reshuffled and people get moved into different things, and long-term goals ultimately get sacrificed. Disconnected between sales, production teams. You could argue that there's disconnection between marketing teams and other teams. But again, I see this in technology and in other businesses as well. When a business starts with a product and then they start getting that product to market and growing into different regions and start having to hire up sales teams or salespeople or marketing folks, there's disconnections between what sales expectation of what the product does and what the engineering expectation of that they can just bring the product down or change the product without actually engaging with the customer. Skills gaps, as technology changes, as systems grow and systems have to be replaced, the people that were brought in to build the original systems don't necessarily have the skills. And then meetings about meetings, people saying that they want to take things offline in meetings. You've been in a meeting where they get to an impasse, there's no data to actually drive the decision, and people say, let's take this offline. And you actually wonder where that goes. It actually never goes anywhere. And then it suddenly comes up again if it becomes a priority. So lots of unproductive meetings. And in fact, I had a customer doing a little bit of analysis initially when I started working with them, that the leadership team is a team of 20 people. The company had 20 people in it. The leadership team were 4, and they were spending 25 hours a week collectively talking to each other. And they were spending very, very little time talking to their own teams. So lots and lots of unproductive meetings. In fact, there's a consultant I was chatting to, Shane, you'll know him as well, Kevin, and he's done a calculator on the cost of meetings. And it's quite a funky calculator where you plug in the salary of everyone attending, the time of the meeting, and it works out the cost per meeting. And it's one way to get a little bit productive very quickly in terms of where your highest paid people are spending their time and where they should be spending their time. And then obviously, again, back to the priorities, leadership teams putting out fires. So Saltwater Consulting, this is the teaching how to fish. So our vision is to equip technology leaders of today with the tools to scale tomorrow. And what we do for our customers is we look at what's working in their business and augment it. And then we challenge what doesn't. And when I say challenge, we really go into the weeds in terms of asking why things don't work. And then we build management programs that measure success to help teams find focus. So I'm going to introduce you to the second person today, and that's Mark. And he's the head of IT for a London-based, a FTSE 250 utilities company. And this is the case study I'm going to get into. And Mark has 6 leaders reporting into him. And each of the teams include engineering, they include the security, the cybersecurity team, the service and support team, the platforms team, and the project delivery teams. So they report into him. And he had a lot of those challenges. He inherited a lot of these teams. They didn't have the skills. They were individual contributors trying to run teams. They were hiring badly. And he asked me to sort of come up with a plan. So I basically told him my approach. And this is the Saltwater Consulting approach. I write about it a lot. You'll see it online. And it's all around think, design, implement. The think piece is largely based around design thinking, but it's almost going into a scenario and going through an ideation phase. You don't necessarily know what problem there is or what the dynamic of the team is, what the opportunities are, what you're going to augment, or what you need to challenge. So there's a mapping stage where you just start thinking through. And that's good advice to anybody going into a problem. Just understand the problem, get different perspectives before deciding what the solution is. Don't just come in with, hey, this new software is going to solve the problem. Understand the different perspectives. So I would facilitate a lot of the think process, and then we would get into design. What are we going to do to change? And then the implementation. Now, there's many consulting firms that come in, they bring a tried and tested, proven 2x2 matrix, they overlap that into the existing team, and they walk away and allow that team to implement. I like to do the implementation. It takes a little bit longer. Doesn't have to be high touch. It could be a check-in every month or joining a morning meeting if I need to. But the implementation piece is quite important to make sure that that design gets implemented properly, and not just within a month or two, but over time. So Mark and I came up with a plan, and the first part was to meet and observe the team, to develop a team charter. Now, the team charter is the webinar. It's the guts of the bones of the webinar today, and I'm going to go into each element of the team charter and why each piece is important. Implement some processes, metrics, reporting, the ongoing review and course correction, and then rolling out this to other areas of the business, if successful. Okay. So the first part to think, very fortunate. I started my business I incorporated my business on the 20th of March, 2020. Now 3 days ago on Paddy's Day, there was a big announcement in Ireland. And yeah, what a time to start a business. But as a result, I realized that my history of bad handwriting was overcome with technology, and I was able to deliver webinars using these Miro boards where we could really capture everything from a team and store it in handwriting that people could legibly read. So that was actually a COVID benefit that I got in terms of starting my business, and I've applied Miro to all my engagements since. The design piece is putting a design together, and again, different customers have different ways that they capture information. It could be G Suite, it could be in Word, it could be using Jira or a technology tool to capture information. And we decided to put this on Google, and the team charter is the design. What are the roles and responsibilities, the how, etc. So I'm going to break the team charter down bit by bit now. So the first piece of the business charter. Now the business charter, it's called a business charter. And Portugal has a history of sailing, and a very famous Portuguese person named Bartholomew Dias, if I pronounce it correctly, was the first person to sail around the tip of Africa. Being born, sort of bred in Cape Town, we knew a lot about that and about that history. But the charter is basically where the ship's going. Is it going in the right direction? Who's on board? Who owns the ship? what is the plan for this? So the business chart is quite similar and follows a similar format. It's getting the people around it, how you do things, what are the goals, etc. That's where we come up with the concept of the business charter. So the first piece of the business charter is the mission and vision. It's interesting. I mean, one of the first things I do when I meet with customers is ask them what their mission and vision statement is, and they normally have to pull it out of a drawer, or they're not 100% crisp or clear on it. And their staff don't necessarily know it. And it's important that you're always focused on that mission. And it helps people, it sets where you want to go, how you want to achieve it. It could be a big, hairy goal that's set in the future. It could be taking over the world. It could be whatever, but set the sights. And then you can take that long-term mission and bring it down into 3 years, 1 year, 90 days, etc. So in our case, in this case study, we wanted to come up with a theme, and I like to come up with a theme with each one of my engagements. And in this case, the theme was to demonstrate what good looks like. So that's people, what they do every day. It's the systems that we put in. Does that system actually demonstrate what good looks like? How are we hiring? Is our hiring process demonstrating what good looks like? What do our customers think? So that was the theme that we put in. The team mission and vision, we implemented that. And basically, it explains your team's goals centered around values. It explains what you do, how you do it, and it does it very quickly. I'm not going to share Mark's one because it'll give the game away in terms of who he is, and I don't share customer information. But I'll share these three, and you can just spend 20 seconds reading them. So Tesla, for example, the word accelerate is actually quite an important word in their mission statement. Electric vehicles tend to accelerate faster than petrol cars. Teslas tend to accelerate faster than other electric vehicles. So the word accelerate would be an intentional word in that mission statement. And then obviously mass market electric cars, again, replicating what Henry Ford did with the Model T. He's started with his high-end cars, experimented, and is now bringing in the Model 3. So it's quite a good mission statement. There's a lot of complexity behind organizing the world's information. And you might question Google's mission statement now. Is their mission statement to provide us with as much advertising as possible? Because that seems to be what the business is doing now. But certainly, when Google started out, it was that white space in the beginning, and that search bar solved a lot of our challenges and our problems, and still do to this day. The next element of the business charter is the team, and putting the right people in the right seats. And that's very important. And I would normally start an exercise, again, using a Miro board, but understanding the org chart and mapping out what the current org chart is and what the future scale org chart looks like. So mapping out now, which tends to have less lines and a few dotted lines and is a bit messy, and this person is in sales but reports to the ops person, and this person's in production, but they actually have a special relationship and report into the CEO. You see a lot of that in smaller organizations. And as I shared earlier, you see people in leadership roles sharing responsibilities. So what I tend to do is just map what currently looks like, and then map what a future looks like. Normally I go into companies that are hiring or scaling, and I'm trying to help them scale well. So I said, right, what does 3 years look like? Does it require another 20 seats or 30 seats or 40 seats or whatever it is? How will the org chart look in 3 years' time? And then what I'll do is I'll put 5 responsibilities. You could put more, but you don't want to spend too long on this, for each person. And then you start mapping where the current people fit into the current org chart. So, is it an account executive? Yes, but they're wearing a sales hat and they're doing the sales management, but we don't really have a sales manager in place because the CEO does that. I start mapping all of that out. And it creates a little bit of a gap analysis in terms of, okay, we need to get crisper on the roles and responsibilities of these people, who they report into, and everything like that. Now, later I'm going to talk about goals and objectives. You cannot set goals and objectives without having your roles and responsibilities right first, because you cannot create accountability, ownership without the right roles and responsibilities. And small companies, startups tend to be scrappy. You hire people with a startup mentality. It's break things, do everything. I'm going to go and print out the flyers. I'm going to run down and run that event at the Web Summit. And then I'm going to come back and actually get on with my day job of writing operational processes. That's normal in a startup. But as you grow and scale, you need to start thinking about creating specialist roles and thinking about that management team, or what a future management team looks like. So that's an important piece of the of the puzzle there. And anybody can do this. And just map out what your current org chart looks like. Are there gaps? What are the roles and responsibilities? And what does the potential future look like? And how do you get to that future? Then there's the tenets. The tenets are guiding principles, their values. They're a shared set of behaviors that a team needs. And again, a fundamental part of a business charter. If you can get the behaviors right of the team, or get the team to agree the behaviors that they want to share. And this is not sort of the directors coming up of an organization, or the founders or the leaders coming up with a few values and saying, these are our values. This tends to, and I involve the full teams in these discussions, and maybe you'd have tenets per team or a tenet across the whole organization. But I tend to involve as many people as possible to get views and opinions from everybody. Not everyone's going to agree with everyone's opinion, and you can't make decisions through full consensus, but at least you're getting the views of the people. And the tenets are a good way. They would typically be 4 to 7 tenets within a team, and the tenets would share what behavior that team wants to have. So you're hiring people for 2 things: their culture, their behaviors, and so culture, behavior, and their skills. And you can't just hire somebody with the skills. They could be the best salesperson in the world, but if they annoy their engineering manager because they don't take ownership of certain things, that's not going to work well for the company as a whole. So these are the tenets that we put together for Mark's team. Now, keep in mind, tenets can be reviewed from time to time as the team changes. It's a good team building exercise, actually, that you can run on an annual basis. So this will be the second set of tenets we've done with the team, and they've gotten a lot closer since then. I'd say some of these tenets may not have landed a few months when we've just started, but they certainly landed now. So ownership is a big one for them, and they want people to take ownership and to bring solutions rather than problems. So they came up with the funky own, don't, moan up on top. And quite funny, a few of my other customers have adopted that as well now. Communicate early and often, all about team communication. Bringing data. So it's great to have an opinion, but back that up with a bit of data, because it'll help decisions when it comes to meetings. So feedback with data is better than feedback without. Also encouraging people that are quiet in the team. A lot of time, have you ever been in a room or at an event where you've wanted to ask a question, but thought, should I really ask that? And then 5 minutes later, somebody else asks the same question. So asking questions that may seem stupid to you removes the ambiguity that the leaders thought they were quite clear on, and generally tends to get a discussion going. So I believe there's no such thing as a stupid question. I think that's one tenet that's been adopted and is encouraged or fostered a lot more collaboration amongst people that wouldn't necessarily speak up in meetings. And then, just onto the bottom one, a good plan executed now is better than a perfect plan executed next week. That sort of demonstrates the behavior of bias for action. Sometimes we get stuck on decisions and we just do not move forward. So, getting a little bit scrappy and saying, well, what's the minimal viable product? What if we make a decision? What happens if that decision doesn't work out? Well, at least we've tried something and we can learn from that and then move forward in a different direction. But not making a decision just puts the team on hold or in a holding pattern. So the message here, and a tenet, was it doesn't have to be perfect. So it's almost giving the teams permission not to be absolutely perfect in everything, but to just get something out, and then you can improve on it next week. So those are the tenets that Mark's team had. And each of my customers come up with different sets of tenets. A lot of them would look and feel the same. But once you've got these tenets in place, you've got a mission in place, and you've got the roles and responsibilities right, you can move on to the next piece, which is starting to demonstrate your playbooks. Now, a lot of the time, stuff is learned from, well, that person does it that way, that's why I'm going to do it this way, or follow what they do, or it's always been done this way. But documenting processes is vital. And again, learning I got from Amazon, everything is measured. There's metrics for everything. Every process is written down. And I completely agree with that, because if you can write down all your processes, you can very quickly understand what doesn't work, and you can optimize, you can start improving. So the operational playbooks or statements or standard operating procedures or run books or whatever you want to call it is the how this team does what it does. Now, I've given a couple of examples there, for example, how you start a project, or how you handle service requests, or what happens when somebody escalates. You get an escalation from like a client complaint and the services level is not met. What are the next steps that you need to do? And it's interesting, like I'm working with a cyber client in Dublin, and they provide advisory services. So they've got very well-paid people providing consulting services in the cybersecurity space. They want to get their processes documented. They can't take people off paid work to get that work done. But what they have done is they've got 4 or 5 graduates that have just joined the organization. So I just said to them, and it was very simple. And again, some of the stuff is not rocket science. I said, get the graduates to write the processes. So they'll shadow the people that are on the job, and then they'll write the process. And then they'll have a retrospective on a monthly basis where they'll read back the process to the senior person. And the senior person can then look at that process, hang on, I do that. Maybe I should change what I do. Maybe we should iterate. And what you're getting is the graduate feeling very fulfilled because they're doing something meaningful for the company. They're starting to document the processes, which is part of their goals, to capture processes so that they can scale well. And the leader getting to get a full reflection in the mirror in terms of what they're doing, and think, hang on, why am I doing it that way? Maybe I should change it. And that gives you the opportunity to start optimizing and start saying, if we remove 2-3 steps here, is that advocating for our customer? Are we going to end up giving our customer a better level of service because we're saving them time? So that's the how. And then the next step is goal setting and KPIs. So goal setting, whether it's setting the big, hairy, audacious goal, that's an MBA term that people learn, but it's the big 10-year goal, or whether it's setting a 1-year goal, it ultimately needs to come back to 90 days and needs to be tracked weekly or monthly. So it's having clear goals in place and making sure you're not deviating. And I've got a good exercise that I'll give to you. If there's no questions at the end and we've got loads of time left and people still want to hear from me, I've got a really good matrix called the Eisenhower matrix, which is a planning what's important versus urgent. And the goals are the important things. Those are the things you're setting to meet your mission. So you've probably heard of the term key performance indicators. You've probably heard of the term objectives and key results, which is widely used in technology companies that are scaling. You've probably heard the term of SMART goals. So SMART is strategic, measurable, achievable, it's relevant, and it's time-based. But goals really need to be reviewed monthly or weekly. And you cannot set goals without the other steps or puzzle pieces in place. So roles and responsibilities, have you got them set? Can you give ownership to this goal to this person? Yes. Do they have the ability to carry out that goal? They do. Do they have the support? Can they escalate if need be? Yes, they can. So important to have the puzzle pieces. And are the shared behaviors there in order to achieve those goals? Those are the tenets. So that's KPIs, and it's the next part of a business charter. And just to break down or the anatomy of a KPI, here's an example that you could use, and you could apply this in other areas. You've got your title, which is to grow revenue by 30% year on year. You've got your metric, which is revenue. It's a revenue metric. The target value, 30%. And you can start questioning this. Can we grow by 30%? Is that achievable? Is that the A in SMART? Should we be growing by 50%? Or can we only grow by 10% based on what our market's doing? Then you've got your value, which is the year. And obviously the time frame is year on year. So this goal is not smart if you say to grow revenue by 30%. From what to when? You know, when? Over a year, over a month? If you take year on year out, it doesn't work. To grow by 30% year on year doesn't work either. To grow what? To grow headcount, to grow number of customers, to grow your revenue. So that's an important metric. And obviously the number is important as well, and it allows you to question that. So that's a bit of a breakdown of what a KPI looks like. And again, less is more. And I advocate this when I speak to customers, less is more. Take on, if you're a leadership team of 4 or 5 people, or you're working with customers that have a leadership team of 4 or 5 people, let each person take a company goal. And then they can each take on 1 or 2 personal goals themselves for a quarter. But anything more than that is it's not achievable. You're going to miss goals and you're not going to move the dial. And again, I really push hard for this. And you know, the word priority, I think its origins come from one or the top thing. But when I sit down with customers and say, yeah, I've got these 30 priorities I need to deal with this week, like pick 2. So I can't pick 2. We have to do all 30. I said, pick 2. So I put a lot of pressure on customers like that. Sometimes they don't like it, but it really helps. And I think they start understanding, okay, if we set the goals correctly, we can tick off to-do lists and tasks, but our priorities need to be focused around a short set of goals per quarter, so that ultimately year on year, over 10 years, they stack up to getting you to where you need to go. The next thing is the metrics, and metrics are part of a KPI, but you also get these safety metrics. So the goal of a Volvo car, for example, is to be the safest car and to get you from A to B. All the metrics inside are analyzing the bits and pieces and any cars these days, but are analyzing everything. You know, have you got enough fuel to get to your destination? Are the airbags working properly? Is there oil in the system? Are the sensors that are doing what they need to do in place? So metrics, I think, keep they work behind the scenes, and they keep the KPIs honest. So KPIs track whether you hit business objectives, and metrics track processes. So they should be put in place to support the KPIs. So for example, you could have a KPI that you want to meet a certain service level agreement within an organization. But what happens if a service level agreement doesn't get met? What happens? So does it trigger an escalation? So I have a customer, for example, I think it was with Mark. He set a goal to reduce the amount, the first response on tickets coming into their support team. I have over 2,000 employees in this organization, and the support team handles quite a lot of tickets every week. And they were handling tickets in excess of 2 hours as a first response. And they wanted to bring that down to under 30 minutes. So that's a great goal to set. You know, everybody gets around that, a first meaningful response. And this is not a response saying, hey, we've received your ticket, thanks, we'll get back to you later. Or please reboot your machine. I don't know if you've ever phoned an ISP or a broadband provider and they say, have you rebooted the router? And it's frustrating. A meaningful response would basically give a solution potentially on the first response. So they wanted to get that down from 2 hours to under 30 minutes. So you put metrics in place to analyze everything. How many emails are coming in versus how many calls? How many abandoned calls are there? So for example, if they're capturing all the calls that come in, and let's say 50 calls come in for the week, but there were another 50 calls that were abandoned, they may get an incorrect measure of that goal, saying, well, of the 50 calls that came in, we handled them within 30 minutes. So we were on goal, but they forget to focus on capturing the abandoned calls. So metrics need to be put in all your processes, everything you do, to keep the KPIs honest. And again, if you go onto Amazon and you order something on Prime, that one-click purchase you do generates probably hundreds of metrics behind the scenes around capacity, around website speeds, around look and feel, around user acceptance, all of these things. Everything is measured. And again, if you've written your playbooks correctly and you've got your processes written down right, it's going to be very easy for you to set metrics on those processes and for you to change those processes. So there's no real limit to the metrics that you can stick in there, but obviously align your metrics with your KPIs. So we get into we're getting into the end. We're getting there soon. This death by PowerPoint is coming to an end, but reporting is the next piece, and how you report. And I've introduced something, and again, through some of the learnings, a single page report to my customers. And I think this is a really good scale mechanism. The idea behind a single page report is that your managers, and again, look, using Mark as an example, he's got six leaders reporting into him. Each of those leaders must present a one-page report every week. And the report needs to be written in a way that anyone can understand your business within 5 minutes of reading it. So they understand what the acronyms mean. They understand what your current goals are, what your focus is. They understand what your KPIs are. And they understand how you're doing, how you're performing against your KPIs. Are you trending down or are you trending up? So reports should not take managers more than 30 minutes to compile. That sounds like a lot. And people say, oh yeah, but you can buy a system that does reporting for you. But the system is only as good as what you put in. And it's not all these systems integrate nicely. And that's why you end up with these mishmash of different numbers and KPIs that people can't understand. So having consistency across your reports are quite important, so that every other team can learn within 5 minutes of reading what the other team's doing. So you compare your KPIs against your set goals. You would use a trend line. So I recommend 5 to 9 weeks as a trend line. 5 weeks means it's more than a month. 9 weeks is typically better, but it's more than 2 months, which means you've gone through 2 billing cycles, 2 quiet cycles. Things happen in a month. If you're only reporting on 2 weeks, you may get skews. You don't know what happened last week, that was the billing period, or that was the week that Web Summit happened and nothing happened. You know, there was no business. So you've got to try and show a trend line over time so that you can actually see if you're trending downwards or trending upwards. So I always talk about this concept with customers called path to green. And path to green is if you start seeing something trending downwards. So week on week, the variance is getting larger. You then go and do a root cause analysis. You do a 5 why analysis, another tool that I've got that's very, very powerful. And I'm surprised at how many teams actually don't use that and just use sticky plasters to solve problems. But root cause, you get to the root cause and you say, right, what is the path to green? What are the actions you're going to take now to change the trend line and start moving it in the right direction? So that over the next 5 to 9 weeks, you're starting to move towards green. That's the most important key. And then obviously, you want your reports reviewed by peer members or by team members or other people on your team. You don't want to come into a report meeting if the data is inaccurate. If people start questioning your data, that's where the trust falls down. And really, it's just there to align the team. So I'll give you an example of a report, and I'm not going to spend too long here, but you typically in the top left, you've got the week number, you've got the team number, you've got the owner who reviewed it, you've got your wins for the week. Again, we want to focus on wins always. You almost want to have a segue into the wins. What happened? Why did it happen? Did we demonstrate what good looked like? And I've rolled this report out to all my customers now. And at first, it's like, oh, do we have to do this? But it gets very powerful. In Mark's case in the UK, they run it on Google. So they can run their reports basically where they have 10 minutes of reading time, which is a real Amazonian thing as well. They do these read first, then talk. So everyone gets to read each other's reports. And they can ask questions. And in Google, it actually tracks the comments. So you can highlight over, for example, this win was a reach out. Everybody can highlight over it and comment. And then then when we get into the discussion, people can actually start working through the comments so that the important stuff that gets called out is getting discussed in the meeting. The bottom here is your team KPIs and examples of trend lines or SLA. Again, this is made up stuff, but it's the type of thing that teams would put in. The top right would be, what are the risks? What, have you got a traffic light system in? Is something gone amber? Has something gone red? That's where you list your project's activities or potential goals. And then you have your team stuff. So if you're scaling and it's important that you're hiring, who's been hired, what's your team building, how you're doing around your team, your development of your team, etc. That's the example of a report. And again, you can see how quickly that can be read and how the information from that business unit can be shared so that across 6 teams, you can, within an hour, review a whole business unit or a whole organization. So this is Mark again. I've been working with that company for the past 18 months now. For the first 6 months was getting Mark's division right and sort of working with his teams and helping them. There's been a number of results. So they've gotten their first response down. It's actually under 15 minutes at the moment. Their CSAT surveys are above 90%. Huge time savings across their management team. There's a lot of accountability and ownership. And, where they started a few quarters ago with 50 goals, they're down to 7 goals for the quarter. So they've actually been able to really focus on what's important and start driving proper priority in the organization. And they implemented this root cause analysis that I spoke about, which has really helped them move the dial, particularly with their legacy systems that they run. So pretty good results there. So I think that sort of moves to the end, right? So my question as part of this webinar is, do you know customers that have experienced pain, that are sitting in a granny gear at the moment? Have you experienced it? And, do you believe that the business charter or implementing some of these mechanisms, particularly around roles and getting the behaviors right, could potentially help your teams? So that's me, Allan Boyle, Saltwater Consulting. And I'm happily take some questions. We're at 10:39. So it gives a few minutes for questions and looking forward to chatting to everyone. I'm going to stop sharing so you can see my mug.
Yeah.
All right.
Yeah. Yeah. Perfect. Excellent. Really, really good. Thank you, Allan. So we're open to questions. Maybe I can ask the first one. There is apparently no stupid questions, so let's try. You said that the importance is to communicate and integrate everyone in this decision making. I mean, you were giving the example of a company where the lead, the decision making team were talking between themselves, but not with the team. But this is all good. But doesn't it depend very much on the personality of the leader, of the person who owns the company or runs the company? And if the person they have different profiles. Somebody might be willing to share, or somebody will be very much hands-on. So how do you deal with the different type of leadership?
There's a couple of things, and it comes out during the charter, but the first thing is, when you understand what the challenges are and you sort of mirror back to those people, are you experiencing these challenges? And then you start going through the roles and responsibilities and you say, right, what does your future look like? Well, we need to get to this much market share, or we need to grow, or we need to hire 20 people. You know, you then start understanding, okay, well why is that not happening? And you can go into further analysis. I mean, I did an analysis with a company that they were struggling within their work in progress team, their project team. And I realized that it's a small team of 6 people, but 35 people had passed through that team within 5 years. The attrition rate was huge. Yeah. And we started asking, okay, well, there's 3 potential problems. You're either hiring incorrectly, you're not managing the team efficiently, or, you know, there's a market change. There's something happening in terms of in the market that the product's not right, or something's not right. So a lot of the time, you know, you work with the leaders. You have to be a little bit tough. You have to challenge what's not working, and say, look, communication might not be your forte, or you may not want to share your revenue number or your NPAT score, but share something. You know, share where you would like to get to. Share the size of your market share. Say, these are the next 20 customers that I would like to get. And by getting these customers, it's going to help us on our mission to become #1 trusted, or #1 quality, or whatever it is. And then say, right, how do you want to share this information? So we know you're not going to share financial data with everyone in the team. That's okay. But you have to share something, because if the team aren't bought into a mission and you don't have a set of shared behaviors, you can't goal that team. And then what ends up is those leaders end up working in the weeds. And oftentimes you see them saying, oh, I don't trust that person to do the job, I'll do it myself. Yeah. And then the person gets frustrated because they don't feel fulfilled, and they leave, and then they have to go into a hiring pattern. Now, of those 35 people that passed through this project team, 30 of those people were hired through recruiters at a 20% fee. And the average tenure of those people was less than 10 months. So they'd never looked at that data before. And just a quick analysis, I was able to tell them, you know, you need to be getting 2 to 3 years from an employee potentially that either in the role before they get promoted. And when they start seeing these numbers in black and white and understanding it, they start realizing, okay, we do need to make a change. And I tend to get a lot of them on board. So it's not easy at times. I mean, you have to go through some challenging days, and a lot of retrospective, but it's something I believe in. And you know, it's not always going to be a right fit. You know, so my approach doesn't necessarily suit everybody, and some people decide they'll go on their own way, and that's why we tend to go into these small engagements first before we roll out to the greater teams.
Okay. Great. Yeah, everybody, you can put your camera so we can see you, and if you want to ask your questions, please do so. So I've got some comments on the chat. So Bernadette is saying, great presentation, Allan, thank you. I think your methodology can also be applied to solo entrepreneurs so that they don't remain static. Love the analogy, granny gear, and the how I sometimes add a storyboard.
Thanks, Bernadette. Yeah, absolutely. And again, the solopreneurs all have customers. So you want to build relationships with your customers as well. So applying some of this methodology, saying this is how I do things, or by writing things down, I'm able to optimize processes. It absolutely applies. It's not just a team thing. But typically the customers I work with would be, you know, these are tools and tips that you could take on yourselves tomorrow, whatever. But with larger teams, they tend to find that having somebody to come in there and playing the bad cop, or becoming sort of devil's advocate, or asking the challenging questions and sort of getting the conversation going in the room, that's why I suppose this industry of consulting exists, you know. So it does make sense for teams to get a job done, to bring people in to become that person that advocates that change.
Thank you.
Can I ask a question?
Sure, please.
Absolutely.
Good morning, Allan. That was a great presentation. I actually work with young emerging leaders, and one of the things that I notice is that very often managers, are checking in, they're doing the steps and they have good processes in place, but they're not actually really, they're just ticking boxes, and they don't think about, they don't turn up intentionally to the meetings. They just see it, and I think sometimes they see it as, I have to do this, but they don't actually say, well, what is the outcome that I want from this meeting? How do I turn up at this meeting so that not only do they get the most out of me, but that I can really connect and build trust with the person in the moment. So I think they get so busy with, you mentioned earlier on about so many priorities. And I use that Eisenhower tool with my clients as well. And it's a really powerful tool to get them to really focus on what matters, what's going to, move the dial. But also they forget about what is their contribution in that moment when they're interacting with their team members.
They do, and the managers are, they're in such a predicament because they've got to manage down, they've got to manage up, they've got to manage sideways, they've got to compete with their peers. It's really a hard space for them. And again, I think the shared set of tenets is really good because, and I sent this email to a client, they're in the audiovisual space just last week. They're sending a communication around new tenets to their whole company. And in the communication, I said to the leaders, you've got to be a little bit vulnerable to the managers. You've actually got to get the team to call you out when you don't live your tenets. Now, we all have days where we live them, where we don't, but the managers need to take some ownership, or they need to support them. So the tenets are not just there as a stick to wave at employees to get stuff done. They need to live those. And it's a tough space for managers because they need to turn up. They need to be all in, and they really need to give that employee time. And it can't always be transactional. So bringing the transactional stuff into the report meetings, like that report I showed you, means that when the managers are spending, if they become more efficient in the time they spend with each other reporting, they can then spend quality time with their teams doing one-to-ones. And the one-to-one meeting has different elements. 1 week it might be a transactional one-to-one. The next week it might be a more, where you're going in your career. Do you feel you're living the tenets? What do you think the future looks like for you? And starting to engage with employees in that way. So managers do have to shake it up a little bit. And there's no silver bullet, right? They're in a difficult place because they're competing with each other for the next job, particularly in larger organizations. And they're under a lot of pressure to deliver. And it's hard, and managers should ideally not be managing, particularly in organizations, should not be managing more than 8 or 9 direct reports. But sometimes you get organizations where there's 20, 30 people reporting into a manager. There's no ways you can turn up for everybody on that, even bi-weekly.
Thank you.
Could I just ask a quick question there, Alan? Just say thanks as well for the presentation. It was really good. Could I just ask, do you end up telling your clients what KPIs and metrics are important, or do you have to lead them to the conclusion of what it is?
I think I help them craft them. So firstly, we understand what's important, and then I have that priority conversation. So, right, okay, are you going to achieve all of these this month? And a manager, maybe they've got 10 KPIs. They say, right, we want to do this. Well, realistically, we can't. Okay, so which ones would you prioritize? Okay, now of these ones, do you think you can write that in a better way? Where is it achievable? In order for you to achieve this KPI, do you need somebody else in this organization to help you get there? So if you want to get the new software launched, do you need somebody to write that software? And does that person report into the engineering manager, for example? So is there a trade-off conversation? So you tend to find that what starts with a long shopping list ends up being quite tactical. What I tend to do is just bring the teams back to what the mission is, first step, or their roles and responsibilities, and say, right, do you believe that this is a role or a KPI that you should have given your roles and responsibilities? Or do you think that this should sit with somebody else? So, Shane, it's a question that it depends. And I think that goes back to the think. I'm constantly observing and looking for, should we be changing tax? Should we be changing? But I don't always prescribe. I almost want the teams to come up with it themselves. If I prescribe, it's like, that's sort of a key component of micromanagement. I don't want to start micromanaging the company that I'm consulting. I'm there to teach them how to fish. And the teaching to fish is the important thing. So I'd rather see them learn, fail a little bit, learn, fail a little bit. Like that example I gave, they had 50 KPIs. They got to the end of the quarter. They achieved 80% of 20 of them. So now they're on 7 KPIs, and there's a good chance they're going to hit 100% of all of them. And that's much better for the whole team and for them. And the KPIs are a lot more strategic and less tactical, operational. So they've started taking the operational stuff and just doing it and owning it, and then bringing more strategic stuff into their quarterly planning. Does that make sense?
Certainly. Thanks, Allan. Very good.
By the way, Shane, all the branding and the color, that's his brainchild. And if you subscribe to the masterclass in 2 days' time, Shane does all my branding and marketing stuff. And I've been working with Shane since the get-go. So happened upon him in a networking meeting, and I really enjoy working with him. But he's doing a branding workshop in 2 days' time. So there's your plug, Shane.
Thank you very much. I didn't pay Allan any money for that. Thank you, Allan. That's very nice.
We're all about mutual back rubs here. Allan, just
Exactly.
quickly before we finish up, who do you focus your consulting efforts toward? As in, what kind of companies are your preference? Just in case when we hear people in the background that we know who you're looking for.
So if I had to, if there's a list in Ireland called the Deloitte fastest 50 tech companies, that'd be pretty spot on, because they're growing 30% year on year, which means they're hiring, which means they're changing. And as they hire quickly, and because they're tech companies, they started with a tech background. So companies that are growing quickly tend to bring in salespeople, and that's where challenges. And having worked and led sales teams before and worked in operations and everything like that, I feel that I can work closely with a technical founder. Technical founders, and I'm generalizing here, so apologies, but they tend to be black and white. We write code. This is the way. People are the problem. We'll solve the solution. We'll solve the world with technology. They're the people I love working with, because they're the people I can challenge the most and get them around to the people and processes side. So a CTO and a fast-growing, something beyond a startup, companies that are established or on a growth transition, not necessarily scaling rapidly, because that are hiring hundreds, and like Stripe that are hiring hundreds of people every day. But your established startup that's looking to scale and mature would be my ideal customer. And the CTO, the CIO, the information manager, head of operations, those are the types of people I work with.
Great, thanks, Allan. And Shane, I won't actually be on the call on Thursday morning, but I will be watching the video later. But I love what you've done for Allan's brand. It's great. Mm-hmm.
Okay, excellent. I was going to say something. So I think if there is no other questions, we are getting a lot of comments, Allan, saying great presentation. Everybody really loved it. I was going to say Allan is going to be in the Algarve at the end of the month, so I can see that few people on the call from the Algarve. So if you want to meet Allan, I will be sharing Allan contacts and the presentation later. And then as Allan and Aoife has mentioned, we will have our masterclass or webinar on Thursday with Shane at 10 o'clock. Don't use the same link. I will be using the link tomorrow for that webinar, because I know a lot of you have registered for that as well. And I think that's it. I mean, I just want to thank again a lot, Allan, for this great presentation. Everybody for your time, and we'll see you again on Thursday or later on. And keep visiting the website. You will find all the information there, and information about our members. And don't hesitate to contact me directly if you want to be introduced to some of our members directly. Okay.
Thanks again. Thanks, Arnold, and I appreciate it. And and thanks for mentioning. I will be in the Algarve. It'll be a family trip, but at the same time, I never say no to a cup of coffee. I'd like to do business in Portugal one day. That's why I'm on this group. And any opportunity to meet somebody to learn about your experiencing your experiences, and it's not to sell or to connect or to transact. It's more just to understand your experiences. I'd really welcome that opportunity. So thanks for the time today.
Excellent. That's it. Thank you very much. See you all very soon. Bye.
Thanks, everyone. Bye.
Thanks. Bye.